Good morning, dear all. We're going to wait a couple minutes to 10:05 for a few more people to join, and we will be starting. Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today for this webinar. We have already 51 attendees, so I think it's sufficient to actually start. Of which I'm proud to say that we have two artificial intelligence bots which are recording the notes of the meeting. So, what the times that we're living at the moment, huh? Quite the times. So, without any further ado, we'll start with the webinar. Let's just get a few formalities out of the way, and let's get the disclaimer out there so everyone can read. I think it's important to keep in mind that certain contents of the meeting are based on experience and analysis, and they are our personal views, and these cannot be constructed as advice in any sort of way, especially with regards to energy costs and the future of energy. The presentation does not constitute technical advice, though it offers knowledge and our opinion with regards to a subject. If you do need any assistance with any application which requires actually detailed calculations with regards to return of investment, you will be better served by contacting the sales team so your application can be assessed in detail. And as usual, all the contents of the presentation are the property of Easy Power, and no further distribution is allowed. Though a recording of the meeting will be posted on our channel, on our YouTube channel, so you can actually revise the context of the meeting at a later stage. Okay. So now let's start with what most people actually wanted to see, and it is what is going to happen to the South African energy costs in the years to come, how the industry will transform, little bit of insight on what is the plan of the government in this respect. And we have to remember that the government of South Africa is the main driver of the energy market at the moment. So it will have a great impact into how that energy market will look in the years to come. So where are we moving? Are we moving to a liberal energy market? Is our current energy market driven by the forces of offer and demand? Or is it rather a monopolistic market into which actually it responds to a monopolistic position by the one and only energy supplier we have in the country, which is Eskom? Well, we are more on the second than the first, but where things are pointing with the interventions that the government has taken in 2023 and 2024. So what you will see, and that is what NERSA is busy doing at the moment, is that we will see a completely different way of buying and selling energy. So at the moment, everyone has to sell energy to Eskom, and Eskom has to resell that energy to various parties, to private companies, to municipalities. This is going to change. The government wants to move through the National Transmission Company of South Africa, to a day-ahead intraday type of system. Okay, so this system will actually reflect hour by hour what the effort and cost of producing and distributing that energy will be. So it will be highly variable. So it will depend on weather conditions. It will depend on availability of different sources of energy. It will depend on the reliability of the different sources of energy which are available each and every 1 hour of the day. So in other words, you will have many factors. And one of them, which is going to be as well an obvious one, will be offer and demand. So for this system to work efficiently, it requires more than one bidder for the energy, because if not, we're back to where we were before, right? So the national transmission company will oversee the wholesale of energy, and it will actually purchase the energy from all these IPPs, of which ESCOM is an IPP at the moment. There is some gray areas, and this is why NERSA hasn't gone full on onto rolling this out, because the NTCSA, National Transmission Company of South Africa, is still on its very first steps. So there's still a few points that still have to be ironed out with regards to the transfer of IPP contracts from ESCOM into this entity, or ESCOM actually absorbing the cost. And then there is as well a few issues related to actually putting together these different way of billing energy to the municipalities and to the customers. So the primary goal of the NTCSA will be to maintain system stability. So what today is done by ESCOM, which is essentially monitoring the grid, making sure that the grid has sufficient energy at any second of the day, will actually be transferred to the NTSA. So now this will be the logical step, because the NTSA will make sure that it has sufficient base load and medium merit load, peak load, emergency reserves for every single hour of the day, and it will rank them based on price. ESCOM will have to compete at some times of the day, while at some other times of the day will actually be offered some sort of availability fee to actually be able to provide, especially off-peak energy. The energy cost will definitely be reflective of the energy mix each hour of the day. And I think that for South Africans that have probably not seen this in play in other countries of the world, I can mention two that actually comes to mind, into which this has been running for a number of years, if not decades. So Spain, one within them, which is one of the leaders on solar energy adoption in Europe, and Colombia in South America, which is a country which has a very deep penetration of hydroelectric energy on the energy mix. So there is a good and a bad that comes with this type of system, into which you have other variables which are not politically controlled, which will actually impact the cost of energy on the years to come. So you'll see things that you don't see today, like energy becoming more expensive on the, for example, if it's a hydroelectric scheme type of country, where you will have energy more expensive if you actually have a drought or a very dry cycle, because you have less energy available from the hydro. Or if you have an unseasonally wet year and you have too much rain on a country which has very deep penetration of solar energy into the intraday cells of energy. So it's different. And it will require inherently one thing, which is that each IPP needs to actually stand on its own merits. So it actually brings the word merit into electrical market. And I think this is important. It doesn't necessarily mean that in 4 years' time, the electricity will be half the cost of what it is today, not at all. But it will reflect the merit of creating that energy, and it will put out of business IPPs which are not able to compete, and it will favor IPPs with energy sources which are more economical. So continuing with this point, this is the South African energy mix as of this year. Okay, so still heavily dependent on coal as base load, 72%. But you can actually see, if you actually put wind, solar PV, CSP, and hydro together, you're close to 12% already of the total nominal capacity of the country on renewable sources, of different dispatchability, of course. To put this in context, if you add those numbers of wind, solar, CSP, and hydro, which does make a very high number of megawatts. The pipeline of projects which are in the process of being executed and or being approved is about of 22,500 megawatts. So just to put that on context, the brown bar on the left is 39,000 megawatts. So it will have a seismic shift with regards to this breakdown of energy. And that is not going to take 50 years to happen. That is going to happen well within the next decade. Some is just already busy happening. Some has some obstacles to take energy to the major centers like PV, which is already oversubscribed in Northern Cape. But this is going to happen. So now, moving forward, how does the energy of South Africa compare to other countries? And here we have to be careful on comparisons, right? Because we've been blessed by a great wind resource on the coast. We've been even more blessed by the high altitude, high radiation, dry desert-like areas that we have in Northern Cape, which allows a world-class resource for solar energy. So our business case will be very comparable to Australia. It will be less comparable to a country like perhaps Brazil, into which a vast amount of energy comes from Itaipu, which is actually a hydro plant, and or any of the other countries down the list which have a heavily subsidized type of energy system, and the government actually subsidizes the energy. So Australia is in a journey, and it's in a journey actually into exactly the same type of system we're moving at, and is reducing the mix of the coal and is increasing the mix of PV into the total mix of energy. So compared to the developed world, of course, where energy is extremely cheap, compared to Australia, which the energy could still increase a little bit more. But I think it's important to keep something in mind. Our energy mix is very similar to some of those developed countries on the top 6 bars that you see there with regards to dependence on coal. So what you can see is the potential of energy to increase quite dramatically as coal is being shifted out, as it happened on many of those countries on those top bars. So that is one of the impacts of the shifting to renewables. Okay. So what has been the speed of PV adoption? And I use PV as a preferred source of renewable energy for this presentation. Well, it's been quite fast. Up to 2022 has been half in merit and half on the not very reliable grid supply in the country. In 2023, it saw an explosion, of course, for the reasons that everyone knows, which was severe load shedding. But what is interesting is that the commercial and industrial adoption has not stopped. As you can see, that's the first quarter of 2024. So it comes to show that what the residential market is very linked to the general financial health of the country. So the households have disposable income to invest in these. Renewable energy solutions have already reached and passed the point of equilibrium into which for businesses makes more sense to engage into these projects than to just hold into that capital and not invest it. So even with what it appears to us, and again, it's an opinion, an effort from the government to slow this down by putting duties into the importation of solar panels, the contrary actually is going to continue to happen, which is that the adoption will continue probably at the same rate, if not more, if the energy increases that are coming actually materialize. So important to see, residential definitely is taking a knock on the back of the very bad financial state of the economy, but not commercial and industrial. So now this is an interesting slide because I think that many people hasn't actually seen the effect that the last 3 years, we'll say the last 36 months, have seen the lion's share of all the PV installed in this country. So what has been the impact on what ESCOM normally called the residual demand, which is what they are there to service, right? Well, that is the dim load that actually ESCOM sees on the control center, no? So this is the famous duck curve, which actually has a shape of like a swan. So you can see year on year how the demand in the middle of the day has dropped, but it has actually dropped dramatically on 2024, as you can see there. It's now close to 21,000 megawatts. So the solid green that you see there touching 16,000 kilowatts is the expected residual demand once RIPP7 is actually in place. So essentially, it's going to put a huge amount of extra energy during standard time into the national grid. So that is going to put pressure on the cost of peak energy, as we're going to see in another slide. But we are moving towards the very same scenario that Australia actually moved on some areas. And if you would like to see the future, maybe 20 years into the future, you're welcome to see the same dot curve for California, into which there is times of the day that the electricity is actually negative, into which actually the utility will pay you to use the electricity so they can maintain stability on the grid. So okay, and this is all good and well, and this is great news to the future. And as someone that has spent close to 20 years in this country, I think the South Africans are very optimistic people, and they always see opportunities and look forward always in an optimistic type of way, especially in business. So while that is the most likely future that we're going to see on 2028, 2029, so what is the current situation and how it works? And this is just a quick refresher on how actually the pricing of electricity works in the country. So the government has an institution, NERSA, which is in charge to actually approving the energy increases of any companies that actually supply energy to the national grid. That runs with a methodology that NERSA created in 2005, which is called the Multi-Year Price Determination Methodology, MYPD. Okay, so that methodology allows ESCOM, which is the energy supplier of the country, to present a very average black box style view of their business when they actually apply for increases. So ESCOM, what is one large company, is more than 40 separate production plants, plus a huge number of IPPs from which they buy and sell energy. So NERSA and the public in general doesn't have visibility of which of those are actually extremely expensive and which are not that extremely expensive. So we see the ESCOM business as an average black box. So that includes as well the cost of capital and amortization of the projects, and that includes as well very large inefficiencies that they have. Totally the opposite of what actually the open market of intraday bidding actually will allow. But this is the current determination that we have at the moment for pricing. So the current methodology runs on 3 years cycles. So we are about to start the next cycle, which most likely will be the last cycle of the MYPD, which we should be seeing in the next few weeks, ESCOM submission going out from NERSA for comment, civil society and business and all the affected parties. It is very important to keep in mind that municipalities in general add little to no added value to the energy business in its current form. So they're just essentially revenue centers, and any kind of cost structure that ESCOM puts forward will be trickled almost on a one-to-one to the municipality. Putting aside that some of the smaller municipalities have been lazy and they haven't put their cost studies to get their increases from NERSA approved, what you will find is a cost plus transfer of the costs that ESCOM gets on this next NYPD into their customers, okay? With a markup, of course. So the NYPD will cover 2026, 2027, and 2028, and it's very likely that it will be the last cycle before the NTCSA starts the intraday trading. We'll see later what actually NERSA had tried last year to implement, but it was just impossible. I mean, it makes more sense for NERSA to focus on how the NTSA will work than to try to have an interim regime or a scheme in between NYPD and the new regime of the NTSA. If you've seen the rates, and again, this is all hearsay because this application has been extremely secret. But if you actually see what Salga actually have commented about the application from ESCOM is trying to get an application where they recover as much as possible on year one. because remember that the NYPD is not an act of law. It's just simply a methodology that actually NERSA publishes for IPPs to actually plan their businesses. So a methodology can change. It will require public consultation, being NERSA a public institution, but the NYPD can be changed to a new system, and 3 years is a long time. So I believe that within what ESCOM is trying to do, is trying to achieve two things on the next year, and those two things I think are extremely important. One is to recoup as much as they can on the tariffs for 2025, including as much as they can from the RCA account. So for the ones that doesn't know what the RCA account is, the RCA account is the difference in cost in between the cost that was submitted to NERSA for the previous multi-year price determination and the real allowable cost incurred by the company, in this case by ESCOM. That includes, unfortunately, cost of primary energy, that includes diesel, that includes interest and amortization of debt, which has been growing at a very high pace. So the numbers are actually quite staggering and quite frightening. So if those increases were to be approved on that current shape, you will actually have a compound average growth rate of 44% from April of 2025 to April of 2028. So what is likely to happen from this point? This is a political process. As you understand, NERSA, while it's an independent institution, is politically commanded. So there are huge implications of a 44% increase on 3 years. They have to balance two things. One, which is the sustainability of ESCOM debt. In order not to make this presentation too long, we haven't dived too deep on that, but it's important to keep in mind that the equity support program that the Treasury of South Africa put in place in 2023 to support ESCOM and assist ESCOM with cash flow hasn't happened quite as it was planned, because ESCOM hasn't been able to hit the milestones that they require or that Treasury required to actually offer the financial assistance to ESCOM and transfer that assistance into equity. So to give an example, in the last year, the financial transfers between Treasury and ESCOM has only covered the interest payments of 2023-2024. The final plan is to reduce the debt by 280 billion, transform all of that in equity, and that will take a few years because the government as well doesn't have a lot of fiscal space to actually physically proceed with those very large transfers of money, so ESCOM can pay down some of that debt. So what is your view with regards to the energy cost? Is that there is going to be a large energy cost next year. There is not an easy way for NERSA to reconcile the financial requirements of ESCOM and keeping a single-digit energy increase. What number? It's difficult to pinpoint. So now the short-term scenario, and this is important, NERSA had a whole new methodology ready to be launched on 2023. They actually called that the EPDM, which actually they sent for consultation on 2023. The EPDM will be at the heart of how, with some modifications, the NTCSA actually will operate. In other words, it will still allow us to see, even within ESCOM, the individual cost of every single power plant on the ESCOM fleet. So we'll allow to actually rank energy at the time of serving the energy to the customers based on merit. And that will actually highlight which plants are efficient, which are inefficient, which should be closed down, which should ESCOM invest on. So this unfortunately was not implemented in December 2023. NERSA decided not to do it. So it's unlikely that between now and the end of the year, anything else will surface. So ESCOM will actually have their application reviewed along the existing methodology. Now, the new methodology of NERSA, whether it is EPDM or a refined version of that, requires a substantial number of players on the market to actually have energy which is reflective of offer and demand. If you have only one or two players, it will still actually yield no rationalization of the market and no decrease on the energy costs. So again, that goes hand in hand with all the new IPPs which are going to come in line. Those new IPPs won't be selling electricity to ESCOM, but to the NTCSA. So what will happen to the ones that have long-term contracts with ESCOM? Well, I presume those contracts will still have to be serviced and will have to be run to the end of the period. So even on the most conservative scenarios of Treasury itself, which is a very interesting study, which actually they presented, it is highly unlikely that the escalation will be less than 30% over the next MYPD period. And this is assuming, of course, that the exchange rate actually holds to the very favorable values that is at the moment. So what we will see, though, is after this multi-year price determination cycle runs out, is that the NTCSA pricing, which will be a daily pricing, will see peak energy to escalate quite dramatically. And it will see off-peak energy and to some extent standard energy in some cities to actually drop. So instead of actually having a highly average cost per kilowatt hour, we're going to move into a cost of kilowatt hours that will incentivize the usage of the energy when it's the cheapest, instead of the usage of the energy at any time. So that takes us to the topic of the talk, which is energy arbitrage. So what is energy arbitrage? Well, energy arbitrage is essentially to use a media, in this case could be a battery, in the case of ESCOM could be a dam, to take energy at times into which the energy is either A, abundant, so you have excess, or B, is inexpensive, like in your off-peak time periods in the middle of the night. So that energy is stored and then is used during peak time periods. So typically, any electrical grid in the world works with 4 types of energy. So you have your base load, which is plants that don't ramp up and down quickly. So they take many hours to actually achieve the steady state, and they require a lot of energy to start up. So those are your coal plants, because the coal plants are very large users of energy on their own. Then during the day, you have your medium merit type of plants. And then the grid will actually call them with medium dispatchability. So in that, you will have solar, chief among them, right? Into which you, in theory, are going to have some energy coming from them. The dispatchability is not 90% plus because renewable energy, right? And then during peak time, you're going to have peak energy. In this case, that will be the grid size battery storage or hydroelectric pump storage systems, which will provide us with peak energy. And then we will have what they call emergency energy, which emergency energy can be used at any time, day or night, to stabilize the grid if any critical energy production asset actually goes offline. So essentially, it will take a handful of minutes to get your peak energy online, while to get emergency will take minutes. So essentially, on the emergency category, you will have your gas turbines and your diesel turbines, which are quick to spool up and to synchronize, similar to a diesel generator. So what we will see is that as the market is liberalized, you will have people investing on all sorts of different types of IPP. So, and some of them will actually be aimed to a more profitable spectrum of the market, where you get more bang for your buck, which is peak times. So energy arbitrage is how to actually take advantage of that differentiated price schedule that you have over the day. So let's put an example in front of you so you can actually understand the concept from a hard application point of view. So what is the most important element to actually be able to provide value to a customer via an arbitrage solution? That the customer A has low off-peak energy consumption, B, that it has a repeatable high peak energy demand, and I will say a scale, right? For these type of solutions, a scale is necessary because of some of the infrastructure costs that we have. So in this case, we have, this is courtesy one of our customers. The data is totally anonymous though. So we have here a customer that actually has a residential complex. is an ESCOM customer. The residential customer is supplied on medium voltage, 11,000 volts. Therefore, it will be on a mega flex or mini flex tariff. Those tariffs are by default time of use tariffs. So for people that hasn't looked in detail in the tariffs, these tariffs tends to actually have 6 energy costs. So 3 standard, peak and off peak for summer, and the very same 3 schedules for winter. So this residential complex, for now, let's assume that it has 4 building blocks. So it has a common supply into all the complex. So we have a single point of supply on the ring main unit, RMU. And the system we intend to install there actually will operate in the following way. During standard time, which depending on the time of on the date of the year, can be anywhere between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m., the battery energy storage system will be recharged. And it will be recharged at a certain rate depending if the system has solar assistance or not. So the standard time energy will be resold to tenants from PV. In this case, we have PV on the system. During the evening peak, we will supply power back to the complex with a blended type of energy, because this energy will have been charged into the battery from grid standard time energy and PV energy. And in the morning peak, we'll actually purchase energy during the night from the grid at off-peak rates. So as an added value with these units tend to have as well grid isolation. They can provide backup power. So the customer on this complex will have as well essentially all the sensors of the complex wired into the backup output of the PCS. So as your gate, security lights, your common lights, stairwell lights, internet, etc., etc. If and when there is any kind of energy excess after fulfilling all of these requirements, some energy will be exported to the ESCOM grid via a small scale embedded generation application. Okay, so how this look, or how we actually come up with the right size of system, right? So, and I think this is an important part. We're going to make a pause here because it's an important concept. Bigger is not better on this context, because we are actually trying to provide the customer with a guaranteed result. So in other words, in this complex, which obviously is a residential complex, have different energy utilization, winter and summer and holidays. What you're trying to achieve here is that the energy which is traded with the grid and back with the tenants, that those cycles happen exactly the same amount of energy, 2 times per day, 365 days a year. So in other words, that you will not have energy in your battery you cannot sell to your tenants, right? Because that will yield to a very large battery system, but neither you have a too small of a battery system neither. So in this case, the customer actually did a very nice analysis of energy, into which actually they could come up with average, maximum, and minimum. And typically, if the variation, as you can see there on peak energy average per hour is large, so we go from a maximum of 535 kilowatts to a minimum of 264, and then fluctuates as an average of 383. So if we take a 260 kilowatt hour per hour arbitrage scenario, we know that we're going to have 365 days a year, into which we can sell every single kilowatt of this energy to somebody. So nothing goes to waste. So the better you understand the load profile of the customer, the better we can actually drill into this and come up with the most efficient size and combination of BSS and PV production. So in the case of this system, we do have as well PV assistance, and it's going to become quite important now when actually you see the end results of these simulations. So we have assumed that we put 480 kilowatts of PV on a carport, not your typical low efficiency complex type of setup where they mount 10 modules on the top of each residential block, but something built for efficiency. We have a BSS of 1,280 kilowatt hour, designed for 260 kilowatt hour per hour peak time service for 3 hours. So now you understand where the 260 kilowatt comes from, because that's the minimum that we actually saw. Remember, we're trying to sell the customer a maximum return of investment. If the energy cost changes, maybe you can go a little bit higher and just aim for the average. So the higher the peak energy becomes, the more attractive becomes to have a less efficient system. Still, you have a great return. Okay. So as a reminder, you can actually see below the granularity for the tariff application. So you have your low demand season and your high demand. Essentially, the same amount of hours of peak and standard. It's just switching some standard hours behind the peak hours of night to the front of the peak hours during the high demand season, which is actually your winter season. So this is how this looks in a graphical format. So you will have your supply from the municipality. The municipality builds a sectional title at that point, after which it goes to an existing RMU that distributes via high voltage, medium voltage wiring, mini subs all around the complex, and that essentially supplies each and every one of the tenants. So it will be a metering bank on each and every one of those building blocks. Then on the other end, you have a mini sub, which is next to RMU and is connected to an inverter, a PCS. In this case of this PCS, it does have solar input. And what are we doing with that solar input? We're using that energy first and foremost to recharge our battery after the morning peak. So we can take all the solar energy, which is very, very low cost of production, into the battery. The excess after the battery is full goes into standard time loads. We have here our BSS units, so 6 clusters, 215 kilowatt hour. So what you see here is the application of a RivoMax system into this complex. We have a step-up, step-down transformer, so we can actually join this RMU. And then we have an anti-export meter, or just simply a meter, which we use ourselves to actually have statistics for the whole complex, right? So from the PCS, we can see the total energy use of the complex at different times of the day. So that's the function of that meter. So now, once you run all the calculations and you go and you allocate the different tariffs per day and per hour for this complex, and you run your scenario, so this is actually what you end up, how the demand and the consumption of energy from the grid end up looking. So what you can see here in the solid bars is actually how physically the unabated or unchanged energy demand of this complex actually looks in winter. And we took for this example a winter day. What's particular about winter? Well, in winter, you actually do have high consumption of peak time because of space heating. You have your typical peaks, right? While people actually come in the mornings and they cook and shower and they go to work, and then you have another peak on the evening as people come back from their offices. So we have superimposed to that a curve with the PV production on a low angle array on carports and how it looks against the standard time demand. And the blue line is essentially what the utility sees after all of this is done. So what you can see here is that, yeah, the utility sees a slightly higher demand and off-peak time because physically we are charging the battery during this whole period from 22 hours to 5 in the morning. It sees a noticeable decrease because we are physically offloading our energy. We are doing arbitrage. We are trading our energy back with the tenants. Then it sees the energy demand to go up again, since we are now busy recharging our battery from solar. And then after the battery is full, you will see physically how our energy goes down again. And as the solar actually tapers down, the energy starts going up again. Then we enter the next peak for operation, which is your evening peak. So again, we go down. In this case, we actually have 3 hours of battery. So that's where we're going 17, 18, 19. That's why you actually see that curve going that way. After which we go back into the grid. And then after that, we start charging our battery again. So now those bars on the bar chart are averages, are not the peak. And that is not what the meter is actually using to actually give you your peak demand. What the meter actually uses to give you your peak demand is the peak demand, which we've seen on this study is close to 530 kilowatts during peak time. So during this time, or that time, we can see peaks of over and above 535 kVA. So net, even if we're increasing our demand at night by charging this battery at 98 kilowatts, the end result is that we are shaving from this customer about 120 kVA of demand, or real demand, which we can actually shave whether the weather is good or bad. And why is that? Because we are reducing the peak demand during the time that they're having the real load peak. So for as long as sort of PCS and BSS is working, there will be a guaranteed drop in demand. It will not be spectacular. It could be much larger if the off-peak consumption was lower, for example. So we use a residential setup to illustrate this example. In a industrial context where the customer only operates during the day, these blue bars will be much lower. So in that case, we can achieve a guaranteed demand reduction much larger. As you know, you cannot guarantee demand reduction with a PV system and only using PV modules. But with this scheme, you can, if you actually understand well enough the customer load profile. So what is just visually, if you actually look at this and you see where most of the energy is being consumed, well, you will see that most of the energy is being consumed at off-peak times and on standard times, but a lot less is being consumed during peak time. So that is the end result of this exercise. So this is the mix before the project implementation. So you can see that 28% of the energy came from peak time energy, 35% came from standard, and 37% came from off-peak. So with these customer tariffs, which are about to increase a whole lot, as you've seen on the previous slides, that represents an average cost of kilowatt of 2.77 rand per kilowatt hour, excluding demand charges and fixed charges, with a peak demand of about 544 kVA. So now, after the project implementation, we've moved from 37% off peak to 56% off peak. And remember, this is a tailored approach. So we are only offering the size of solution that will pay itself on the quickest possible time. So the peak energy has reduced from 28% to 10%, and your standard energy remains more or less the same because our PV system is being mostly used to recharge a battery. Your typical cost, if you exclude the inverter, of solar modules, structures, carports, just this bill of materials to make power, the levelized cost of energy, is close to 0.7, 0.8 rand per kilowatt hour. So which is vastly less than the cost of standard energy. Therefore, it makes sense to send all that energy to the battery to offset peak energy. So what is the end result? Your cost of energy goes down to 1.83 rand per kilowatt hour at today's rates, okay? And you will have a demand reduction approximately of 120, 130 kVA, which actually, it's a lot more valuable than the energy itself, if you actually put it into the equation. So it's a total reduction of 35% in peak energy consumption for this complex. So is PV plus arbitrage a good combination? Is the best. It's absolutely the best. It's the best of both worlds. It's how it should be done. It's a very efficient setup from an energy generation point of view. The arbitrage part happens 365 days a year. For the people on the call which are experienced PV designers, they do understand that PV, it's highly dependent on weather. Batteries are not. So the arbitrage is actually very dependable as long as the equipment doesn't break down. So it's not influenced by weather, except on the amount of energy we put on the battery from PV. And if you have a case into which your peak demand naturally coincides with peak times, you can actually have a guaranteed reduction into your demand charge from the energy bill, which is the holy grail of the industry, what people is actually pursuing. And I say that with quotes because, of course, you can achieve this last by having a system that is totally off-grid. But that will take an incredible amount of money on the example that we're using here on apartment complex. While with this relatively small tailored solution, we can achieve a result and we can guarantee it. So the effective average energy rate for the complex is slightly below the standard time tariff. So a number that we saw on the previous slide is actually less than the standard time tariff that the complex pays. If we take this to an industrial or commercial setup, it could be actually closer to the off-peak energy instead of closer to the standard time, or even less than the off-peak energy if the system is coupled with a very large PV plant. So, as I said, this is the kind of application that requires a little bit of pen and paper and requires simulation and calculation to actually see the savings clearly and to be able to design and size the solution properly. But we have a wealth of experience doing this. But there is no two cases which are the same. So the load profile of the customer and the schedule, the structure of the tariff, we need to understand both quite well to be able to design the most efficient system for the customer. And it's important when the customer is making an investment like this, the settings don't have to be static. They can and they should be customized dynamically, because if you remember one of the previous slides, we're moving into a market into which energy costs will be a little bit more volatile. And then you want to be able to actually change your settings on the go in your units so you can keep generating value for the customers. Okay. So PV plus arbitrage, amazing combination. And I think this is what is going to, as the grid becomes more reliable and a tremendous amount of investment goes into distribution and generation, customers will be more and more interested into how to use renewable energy better and how to pay less demand. So I think that the two are going to go hand in hand. ESCO monopoly has already an expiration date, whether they like it or not. So now a little bit of a couple slides onto what makes all of this possible. So for people that is not familiar with our solution, it's called RivoMax. It's a hybrid modular battery energy storage system. So as plug and play as it can be with this large equipment. It's scalable and simple to install. So every one of those modules that you see on the photos are individual modules, which can be taken to site and interconnected. The modules are pre-assembled and pre-tested. So there is very little field work that is required to get the equipment to work, to commission. The equipment was ready to connect on site. As a matter of fact, we provide the customers with the guidance on the commissioning as well. They are outdoor rated, air conditioned and sealed. So of course they're DC coupled. So when I was mentioning that we have a BSS system with a PV input, I'm referring to our solution RivoMax. So you can see here another example, slightly larger example here, in this case with 3 battery clusters. So we utilize, of course, lithium batteries for storage, lithium iron phosphate. We work on 215 kilowatt hour per cluster, and we work on a high voltage type of system for the battery, much higher than some of our competition. So this system is a fully hybrid type of system. While the presentation is about arbitrage, and we are not covering all the demands of the customer, there might be some instances into which a PCS is large enough to cover all the requirements of the customer. So in that case, the unit can be the main provider of energy to the customer. So in that case, we have fast transfer time, 10 milliseconds, and there is a rectifier available for customers that want zero transfer time. Okay. So PCSs range from 100 to 500 kVA. They can be parallel to actually scale up to larger systems. As I mentioned, our nominal battery system starts at 768 volts. These to actually keep low currents on the DC bus, because the system is designed to primarily use battery energy. The enclosures are IP65, they are sealed. As you can see, state-of-the-art safety on board. So we have fire suppression, air conditioning. Very important point, I'm going to actually spend 5 minutes on that now. We have on board contactors and fuses. Each PCS can carry up to 10 of these clusters. Our equipment is certified with UN 38.3, which means that it's safe to transport pre-assembled, so we don't have to actually load the modules into the enclosures on site. This is very unique on the local market, an important advantage. So this is an example of a time of use application with our equipment. So we can customize either on a daily cycle or a weekly cycle or a day-by-day cycle, the operation mode into up to 10 time blocks. So this affords a huge amount of flexibility on pursuing the best strategy that suits the combination of load profile and energy rates of the customer. So as you can see, actually the battery can be dynamically managed both on the state of charge and on the rate at which it's actually recharged from the grid. So we designed this firmware with essentially time of use and arbitrage in mind. So the equipment actually can offer maximum efficiency, maximum savings to the customers. So now, with any of these investments, the customers don't make their money over 3 months. So the payback periods can be 3 to 4 years, and then the system has to have a very long service life. And industry, there is many systems that have been installed over the last year that I don't think will last more than 1 or 2 years, and very large ones. There is an important learning curve that is still being learned by the local market. And I think the most important one is the thermal control on your BSS. So thermal control is difficult to achieve on the best of days. If you look at that photo, you got a whole lot of batteries connected in series, and then you have a whole lot of cells inside, which are connected in series as well. And typically, you would like to actually have a thermal equilibrium inside of all of that pack to make sure that you don't get one cell that is running hotter than the rest. So there is different ways to go about this. So we can actually use air cooling, which is what you see there. And air cooling is sufficient if you actually are using reasonable rate of charge and discharge, 0.5 C, both in and out of the battery. If you want higher rates and you want batteries to last and you want batteries to degrade at a predictable rate, then we have a solution that offers liquid cooling. Degradation is proportional to battery temperature. Battery temperature is not proportional to what your air conditioning temperature is. So, example, if you take a battery, which is a hunk of metal, has no vents, and you put it inside of a container, and in the other corner, you put an air conditioner, that is, is better definitely than not having an air conditioner, but it's nowhere close to what a battery needs with regards to airflow. Because there is not sufficient natural convection on the battery to actually cool down sufficiently when it's charging and discharging. So many of our competitors and ourselves have moved to systems into which there is a better thermal control. So you can see we have an HVAC mounted on the door, which is physically pushing air through a set of conduits, then through baffles inside of the batteries to keep a steady temperature profile inside of the battery. Again, the same solution can be engineered with a water cool system. It's more complex, it's costlier, needs more maintenance as well. Then the second point, which is I think is a super important one, is actually risk, right? So this is a risk reward equation. So one lithium fire is one too many. What you will see on international news is that these fires, while they start, they are very, very difficult to stop, if not impossible. And that applies from small systems to very large systems. So there was a very bad lithium fire on the US actually a couple of weeks ago in a utility scale storage location. So in our units, actually, we use condensed aerosol fire extinguishing system. The way that this operates is slightly different to what many systems operate in the industry, into which you have to have either high temperature of the gases of the enclosure or an open flame or both for the system to actually operate. So we have three levels of thresholds, if you want to call them. And the first one is going to be temperature ramp. So we are measuring 10 times per second the temperature for cells. If the temperature gradient of the cell increases above a certain parameter, the system will be trip. If still continues to increase, while the system is trip, then the fire extinguishing system will be activated. So in other words, we'll activate this before we actually have ignition, with the hope that we can still stop it there. This is what the industry is moving towards too, because once a fire actually starts, it's very, very difficult to stop. So most of the measures that you have there is to mitigate the fire rather than to actually stop on its tracks. So this is a type of fire that actually is called Class D. The type of system we utilize is a flooding type, still, even if it uses particles. It uses ultrafine potassium salt particles, which are atomized by this cartridge that you see here mounted on the door. Of course, it doesn't have the drawbacks using a gas type of system, especially because some of the gases are actually not friendly to the ozone layer. They're greenhouse gases. The cabinet has a fire rating. It's not infinite, of course. It will allow some time for reaction as well and for firefighting efforts. The device is pyrotechnically activated. So that powder that is inside will actually be propelled out of its canister by a pyrotechnic charge inside. And as I mentioned, we actually have to also fire rating inside of the enclosure. So now the BSS control is critical on any of these applications. I mean, your battery not only cannot be a black box. When you are selling a customer a BSS solution for 10 years of useful life, this will require constant maintenance. So you need to actually be able to drill down as an EPC or as an owner of the system constantly into the parameters of your BSS. And some batteries on the market, you actually can do that. So they are black boxes. You can see SOC voltage, but you cannot really drill down into every single cell and temperature and voltages. So our system is an open type of system. So we have low level control on site down to every single parameter that the BCMU actually can do for actually controlling and protecting the battery. From one screen, we can monitor up to 10 clusters. The system actually as well is your main black box, if you will, for recording. So you can actually get all the alarms or warnings. So the system has had right there and then with a USB stick. And for the customers that have installed this with us, I mean, once they've done a few jobs, they get to the familiarity and the ease of use of this interface. Okay, this is all included as a base of our RivoMax product. So with that, we're going to conclude our webinar, which was actually scheduled to be 1 hour. I'm going to open the floor for some questions on the question section of the webinar. In the meanwhile, I know everyone is super busy these days. I'm going to thank you for this hour you have shared with us. If you want to take a small survey about the webinar, by all means, you can take a photo of that QR code on the presentation. It's only 4 questions. It's going to take 15 seconds. So we can actually try and improve the quality of our content and make it more relevant to our customers. Okay, so now I'm going to see if we have any questions on the Q&A section here. So we'll leave the Q&A section open for a few minutes in case somebody wants to pose a question there. I'll be happy to answer it if I can. Right, doesn't look like there is many questions now, so I'm going to thank you once again for your attendance today. We'll be circulating as well the presentation as a PDF to the attendees. And once the recording is available by Teams, we'll load that into our YouTube channel. Thanks once again, and very good luck on to the rest of your day. Bye-bye. Oh, so we have we have here, Matthew put a question here, cost projection for 5 years of electricity. I think that the cost projection for the next 3 years is a lot more clear. So electricity will increase on the next 3 years, at least 40% compound. Once the NTCSA is actually in action, you will see changes on energy by time of use, and you will see some of this energy to actually lower its price. So in other words, you will have standard time energy becoming cheaper, and you will have peak energy becoming more expensive. So we here have a Thunder Raji with self-generation battery energy arbitrage penetration. How do you think municipalities and ESCOM will respond to the declining revenue? Well, look, this is a good one. So there is 2 problems here. The first one is, as per the law in South Africa, the law needs to be changed. I think that that's part of what is going to happen. The municipalities are the ones which are supposed to actually sell energy, right? So there is not a provision in the current law into which you or I cannot actually open a distribution company and supply power to the Santon district, as you will do with a fiber company, for example. Right? So that today doesn't exist, but that needs to change. So the impact on the municipalities will be devastating. It will, because essentially they need to align themselves with the time of use type of tariffs. And what you're going to have is that most of the customers are customers that consumes energy from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. So that means that the implementation of BSS and PV will be devastating to municipalities. So municipalities will probably suffer a lot, but the NTCSA cannot be giving, proper rights and start doing intraday bidding without opening the market for actually actors on the distribution side of the supply chain. So ESCOM responds to declining revenues, which is the second part of the question. Well, ESCOM is very busy on the implementation of their own renewable energy projects, because it is an open secret that actually, with the low cost of capital per watt produced of solar, that is a great business. So ESCOM is very busy actually becoming one of the players in this space. ESCOM has only played on the renewables market just by being an intermediary to IPPs, but that's not going to last for long. No, at least it's not the plan of the current CEO. So ESCOM will downsize. That's a guarantee. So at the moment, what the government did was a titanic effort to stabilize the grid. And that by putting every single asset actually online that they could. But as more and more IPPs come online, what you will see that ESCOM will start closing down the assets that doesn't make financial sense. Because remember that they will have to meet different times of the day for energy for the day. So it will be unsustainable to keep all the production assets intact. So they will move some of their people to some of their assets, which will be renewable based, and they will close some of the coal production assets. And then you will have many, many private people which will be filling the gaps that they will be leaving. So, in other words, ESCOM will survive. ESCOM will see the end of the tunnel here, not on the size of company that it is at the moment, but it will see the end of the tunnel. Municipalities, on the other end, is a political problem. And what you have there is that the current problem that ESCOM has with billing will be transferred to NTCSA. And the NTCSA is the one that actually will decide how to deal with the municipalities. Okay, so any more questions here? Let me see here on the list. Yeah, well, I don't see any more questions there. Some people have left already. Okay, so as a nugget, just before I close the meeting, as a nugget there from what we've seen on the numbers that we ran for the presentation, just the recovery account that ESCOM needs to recover for 2023, which will have to be recovered next year, is in excess of 30 billion rands. So take the kilowatts serviced by ESCOM on year 20 and 23 and divide that by, divide those 30 billion in between those kilowatt hour, and then you will see how many rands per kilowatt hour the RCA account actually will represent. And I don't see how ESCOM will not be allowed to recover the diesel expenses that they actually have incurred. So for us in the industry, we'll have a second air on the next 2 years because there is not sufficient new IPPs in place. The new scheme is not ready. So ESCOM is too big to fail. They need certain amount of money to survive. So I don't see how they will be denied assistance on the RCA account. So the increase next year will be large, very, very large. All right. Thanks once again to everyone for your contribution today. And I will be chatting to you soon. Thanks a lot.